Hi, welcome back to Understanding Human Evil. This is session 8, and the subject of this lesson is narcissistic evil. Narcissistic evil is the form of evil that most people think about when they think about the word evil, when they describe something as evil. It's the evil that emanates from an individual for whom there is no concern, care for anybody else, and it is driven by pure selfish and self-absorbed motives. So the more sensational evils that we come across, the high crime, the sensationalist tabloid newspaper man slashes wife to death in rage, or whatever that is. This is what we think about when we think about evil. That it's that feeling of that you're encountering a form of human behavior that's grounded in a tremendous outburst of rage and anger against some form of a feeling of being undermined or being in some way threatened. And what is being threatened is the narcissist's sense of their own value, which is almost always overvalued and overestimated. So in order to understand more clearly what narcissistic evil is, we should talk a little bit more about narcissism. And I won't go into too much detail because that's a big subject. It's something that is much more available in the contemporary thinking. People are more familiar with it. We see it written about a lot more, and it's now probably being overused a bit, I think, that people are being accused of being narcissists left, right, and centre. And when relationships break down, oftentimes it's a person, oh, and he was a narcissist or whatever. And I think the overuse of it is not helpful. But anyway, where does it come from? The word Narcissus comes from Greek mythology, and we know that Greek mythology is a tremendously rich source of understanding of how the world works in terms of the human condition. And the story of Narcissus is a good case in point. Narcissus was a hunter and a very beautiful looking man. And the Greeks had a tremendous value on the aesthetic, the beauty aesthetic. And he was also a hunter, so he was physically very, very healthy and very fit and all the rest that goes with that. But he was very, very proud of himself. So proud of himself that he felt that he was superior to everybody else, and also that he was almost superior to the gods. He did not have a respectful attitude to the gods, and Zeus decided to punish him. Another little addendum to that story is that the wood nymph Echo, was in love with Narcissus, and he dismissed her as well because he felt so self-important. But Echo had also gotten in the way of the gods as well, and she was punished. So Zeus gave the task of punishing Narcissus to Nemesis. And Nemesis is the deliverer of retribution, divine retribution. And the word nemesis, we sometimes think your nemesis is your enemy, but there's a little, it's not just your enemy. There's a kind of a clause in there somewhere, a nuance, which is that your nemesis is an enemy who seeks to cause you pain for something that you have wrong, that you have actually some flaw in your own character. So the goddess of Nemesis was sent to punish Narcissus, and the way she did this is that she punished Narcissus by bringing him to a clear pool in the forest where he could see an image of himself. And he fell so deeply in love with himself and his own beauty that he gradually wasted away and died. Now, Echo was punished because she was chattering a lot and she annoyed Nemesis, and Echo was punished by virtue of not being able to have a voice of her own. She could only echo or reflect or speak the last few phrases that she heard from someone else. So she was in love with Nemesis, and everything, or she was in love with Narcissus, but she could not tell him this. She was powerless to tell him of her love because she was not able to verbalize that. She could only verbalize the last few phrases that she heard from Narcissus. Now, this is interesting from a psychological point of view. There are certain relationships that you would say this is what's called a codependent relationship. And this is an aside now, but just briefly, that the narcissistic person tends to be in a relationship with someone can only echo, and this is where the word echo comes from, can only repeat back to them what they've said themselves. They only reflect back to them. They're not capable of having an identity of their own. So people who have very, very fragile sense of identity and tend to take their identity from somebody else will be inclined to be attracted to somebody who's narcissistic. And the narcissist is attracted to the person like that because they're always reflecting back to them what they're saying themselves. There's no real reciprocity, really. There's no two identities at work. There's one identity, the narcissists, and the other is simply reflecting it back. So that's where the word echo comes from. Anyway, that's an aside. So Narcissus fell in love with his own vision of himself, his own beauty. And part of the result of it was that he never developed any of his own or any other capacities. He wasted away because he became a hollow individual who simply he was a one-trick pony. That's one really important theme of narcissism, is that self-absorption, self-love, and devotion and idolization of the self. And the thing about Narcissus was that Narcissus was actually a beautiful, handsome hunter. So in a way, you could not really feel sorry for him, but you could at least say he was in love with something that was of value, which was his own beauty. But many narcissists have very little to be in love with about themselves, except that they're just themselves. The second strand in understanding narcissism comes from Sigmund Freud. And Freud's work is the foundation of modern psychotherapy and a great deal of our modern thinking about life. And he has been underestimated and cast aside because of some of the crazy things that he talked about, penis envy and all that kind of mad stuff, infantile sexuality. Actually, his thing about infantile sexuality is not completely invalid. The notion that the pleasure principle, is an important part of child development, but he went into places with that really don't warrant no evidence for it. But one of the things that he did understand was that the human infant is deeply and profoundly narcissistic, and profoundly narcissistic for a very good reason, which is that their very survival is dependent on their narcissism. And what did he mean by this? He meant that, and if we think about this in terms of a thought experiment, and you think about when an infant comes into the world, an infant is coming into the world from a place of bliss. Whatever level of consciousness they have, which is very, very limited, their sensations are ones of blissful existence in the womb. And when they arrive into the world, their first engagement with reality comes, and Erik Erikson helps us with this. The first engagement that an infant has in the world is the conflict between trust and mistrust. And trust is the experience of knowing or learning or growing in a belief is too strong a word because you can't have a belief as an infant, but the sense that your needs are going to be met. And so the loved infant, when the loved infant gets a hunger pain, it cries. He or she cries, and the mother figure comes and feeds the child, whether it's the breast, whether it's the bottle, but that whole ritual of feeding will be one of love, of connection, of care, of soothing. So the infant is soothed into a state of bliss. If the infant is cold and it cries with the cold, then it's wrapped in a blanket, it's petted, it's kissed, it's touched, and it grows back into that sense of bliss. And over a period of quite a significant period of time, there's hundreds of these incidences whereby the infant's relationship with the world is one whereby they control the world. They have a need, and the need is met, and they return to bliss and happiness and satisfaction. So over a long period of time, hundreds of engagements like this, an infant grows into the baby, baby starts to become a toddler, and the whole relationship with the world is that they are the center of the universe. This is a narcissistic condition, whereby the feeling is that the world is there for their, and that they are deeply and profoundly cared for and supported and loved. Over a period of time, as time goes along, something happens. Cognitively, the baby's developing, but also the changes begin to happen, which is that someday the baby will cry and mother is too busy and will leave them crying. And now something starts to happen, which is an insecurity starts to emerge that can continue into adult life depending on how much of it goes on. And finally, and we will see as an example, the toddler, the terrible twos, because this is the existential crisis, the first major existential crisis in human life, and there are many throughout life, is the realization on the part of a child that they're actually not in control at all, and that they're powerless. And they rage against this. So when you're in a supermarket mall and you see a toddler screaming and crying and banging his hands on his head because the mother has said, no, you cannot have that bar of chocolate, we can smile at that because anybody who's reared children can see, this is the terrible twos or whatever. But there's something very deep going on here. This child is recalibrating their sense of their relationship with life and with reality. And they have to navigate that. And almost all throughout life, you're navigating this relationship. But the first major break in the narcissistic wound, we call it, is the realization that not only are you not the center of the universe, but that everything that you've been gotten so far, everything that you've had so far has been because somebody else cared enough for you to give you that. And they may choose not to do that. And so that creates the rage. And in a healthy child, the child will develop a recognition that they can survive that event and they can survive that sense of rage, and they don't have to do anything to harm anybody as a result of this, but that gradually they learn how to relate to themselves in a way that they can accept not getting everything they want and everything they need, number one. And secondly, a growing realization that the other person may have needs too, which would mean that they're not there completely to serve you. So the first break in the narcissistic moment is that. And gradually in healthy development, you develop a healthy narcissism, which is a sense that you have a responsibility to try to meet your own needs as they come along, but you also develop a healthier understanding that you are not the center of the universe, and not everybody in the world is there to service your needs. People who do not navigate this, or for whatever reason, we won't go into too much of the psychology background of this, can grow into people who never get that message. They don't get the memo, as I say, that they're not the center of the universe, and people's function in life is not to deliver and to care and give them everything they want. So when people develop into an unhealthy narcissism and grow into narcissistic people, they have certain characteristics. One is they have a sense of entitlement, profound sense of entitlement, that they are entitled to get whatever they want whenever they want it. They have a very grave difficulty in delaying gratification, which is to recognize that you at times need to delay gratifying your needs for the sake of something else. The third is they have a sense that everybody in their orbit is there to serve them, and they are willing to misuse and use and abuse people to get them to do that is their requirement. A fourth piece of this is a sense that they don't care about other people's needs, and they don't have an empathy for other people. They don't see other people as their equal. And Zeus punished Narcissus because of this feature, which is that he felt that his needs, that he was more important than anybody else in the world. Okay, so what does this have to do with the problem of evil? Well, narcissistic evil is the evil that grows out of that dynamic of forcing everybody else to do your bidding whenever you want it and gratify your needs regardless of how much it costs them. Because you can be very successful as a narcissistic person if you can get the world, because this is your task as a narcissistic person, is to turn the world into your slave. And you can become quite successful at doing that without causing without becoming a sensationalist evildoer, like the people that we talk about, serial killers and murderers and everything else. Okay, there's a high proportion of those that are very narcissistic, but you also have some of the most successful people in the world who are highly narcissistic. That's because they've been able to use their skill set to create circumstances where, by virtue of having, for example, a great deal of money, they can buy whatever they want. They can do whatever they want, and on the face of it, they don't seem to be engaging in causing grave suffering. So it's not always the case that narcissistic people cause a lot of evil in the world, but narcissistic evil is the condition whereby the evil is being caused out of the narcissistic needs of the perpetrator. Narcissistic evil is causing grave harm and suffering, and undeserved suffering by somebody when the perpetrator is doing so out of the need to gratify what they want when they want it because they feel entitled to it. And they don't care about the suffering of other people. This will take us back to Immanuel Kant, where we spoke in session 3 about radical evil and the notion that radical evil is when you subordinate the moral law to your own desires and instincts and needs. And Kant was saying that the moral law exists and you have a conflict because there's a part of you that wants to obey the moral law that kind of admits or acknowledges that that law has a value outside of your particular needs. Narcissism is a specific situation where that is not at work because there isn't a moral law. There isn't a system of law that has been integrated into the person. They might give a nodding agreement that social codes are important or whatever, but they don't have a moral compass outside of what they want because they are the source of their morality. Moral thinking tells us that there's a moral law means that there's something external to the individual that has validity about how we should behave. In a narcissist, the only grounds for how we behave is what they want and what they need and what they feel entitled. So they don't go through the moral conflict. And this is why it's so difficult for people who are moral people, who have a normal, healthy morality. There are different ways that operates. Cannot understand how a narcissist functions because they're assuming that the narcissist has a morality over and above their particular instinctual desire at a particular time. And the narcissist doesn't have that. Now, a narcissist might pretend that they have in order to convince people to do something for them. They may convince you that this is the right thing to do. They don't care that it's the right thing to do. They're only telling you that it's the right thing to do because they want it. They feel that if they can get you to do it because they convince you that it's the right thing to do, what they're doing is you do it then because you think it's the right thing to do, but the reason they're getting you to do it is because they want you to do it. So that's the first piece, that there isn't a moral functional piece going on outside or over and above their narcissistic desires to do whatever they want when they want it. The second, because of this then, there are two pieces then. The next piece is that because there is not a morality at work, there is a tendency for narcissistic people to become inveterate liars. Truth means nothing. So if truth means nothing, then lying means nothing. So you just lie in order to get what you want. That's it. Whatever the lie is. And what we've discovered in our looking at human evil is that if you lie, you can convince other people that the lie is the truth. And of course, that's a very important part of converting the world to suit your desires and your needs. Now we're moving into a form of narcissistic evil, which is the way that narcissistic people can get their holds on power. And here is the connection between ideology and narcissism. And this mix of ideology and narcissism is profoundly important in terms of understanding how a mass evil occurs, how you can actually get not just your own personal evil at work, which is your own narcissism at work to affect one person or two people or three people around you. You're in a relationship, for example, you're in a marriage, maybe you're a narcissist and you are very successful and everybody thinks you're fine and everything else, but up close and personal, you're just using the other people, and you don't seem to be an evil person, but when you get back home, you can mistreat your spouse terribly and cause terrible suffering because they're not giving you what you want at a particular time, because they are with you 24/7 and they see through this. That's your common regarding narcissist. But what happens when a narcissist gets hold of the power of the state, gets hold of the military, gets hold of the press, gets hold of the media? Now we have the possibility of mass evildoing at a huge level, because the narcissist is driven by the need to get power over the people around them. And the greatest powers you can have is to get political power or religious power. So here's two areas in life where you see narcissists more likely to appear: in political power and in religious power, because a narcissist is very, very attracted to power. Power is how they fix the unresolved powerlessness of that childhood time, when the feeling of being completely out of power. So what they do is they never navigate powerlessness. They never go through the thing about how to accept powerlessness and how to develop a stable and reasonable connection between powerlessness and power. That doesn't work. There's only one game in town, and that is to get hold of power and use it to fulfill your dynamic needs for gratification. With power and control, then, gives you the capacity to get whatever you want whenever you want, and it doesn't matter what the consequences are. So it's a deadly combination when a narcissist gets hands on power. Why is that? Because the ideologues, and this is how the people who are narcissistic are able to pretend that they're not. They're able to pretend that they are actually leading the state, leading the society, leading the gang, whatever, into a better way of life, because they have embraced an ideology. And the ideologues, the people the true believers, who we spoke about in terms of ideology in our last session, they believe that they're doing right for right's sake. A pernicious ideology is one that will require them to do evil in order to fulfill the good. The narcissist gets hold of power by convincing the ideologues that they're one of them, but they're actually not. The narcissistic leader doesn't care about the ideology. The ideology is just a vehicle for them to aggrandize themselves and to find all the resources of their society to fulfill themselves sexually, emotionally, physically, materialistically. And so that's how you see leaders who are in these situations where the people, they have the adulation of the masses, but then you look and you realize, you find out a little bit more about them, and then you find out that they're involved in orgies. You find out that they don't care about the people around them. You think about all the, I don't want to give too many examples, but historically you look back and you think, gosh, this person wanted people to have, we'll say, Mao Zedong, for example. I mean, the great leader of China during the Cultural Revolution, the movement of the peasants, the care of the peasants under the colonial, or the feudal mistreatment of the peasantry and everything. Mao Zedong didn't care about the peasants. If you read his life story, you realize, oh my God, he sacrificed them in their millions to suit himself. He was a self-aggrandized, and he wanted Stalin's support. He wanted Stalin to admire him, and that was his big show. And when he would come into a village, they'd clear the village, get rid of all the peasants. He'd build a villa for himself. He'd build a place for himself that he would be able to indulge in all his spiritual, physical, sexual, sensual appetites to his heart's content, regardless of what was happening to the peasantry. That's just an example. If you want to go to probably the genius depiction of narcissism is Tony Soprano. Tony Soprano, everything that he did for himself. Everything that was going on, he sacrificed his family, he sacrificed his people, he sacrificed his friends. When it came down to it, it was all about him. So narcissistic evil is the evil that emerges from a person who is narcissistically devoted to their sense of entitlement. They feel that they're entitled to everything, that they get into a rage when they don't get their needs met. They are willing to punish and mistreat everybody else to get what they want. There is no moral compass at work, and that's why it's so difficult for people to understand that. And one of the difficulties that people have is they think that if they can sit down and talk to and maybe explain to a narcissist that what they're doing isn't working, or isn't helpful, or isn't whatever, or they're appealing to some kind of moral compass to help a narcissist to understand that what they're doing is causing pain, they're fooling themselves, because the narcissist doesn't care, because the narcissist has no empathy for anybody else, because you don't need to have empathy for anybody else, because nobody else is important, and the only importance that anybody in the world has is to be there to give you what you want. We do ourselves a disservice if we don't understand that narcissistic evil, it's different from ideological evil, it's different from banal evil, it's different from radical evil, and the solutions to narcissistic evil are different than the solutions to these other forms. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk in our next session about how do we combat evil. And one of the first things we have to look at is we have to identify which form of evil it is. Now, you'll know by now that we can't just parcel out each of these as if they interact with each other. These are cables, these are a strand in the cable of evil. Narcissistic evil and ideological evil can be at work at the same time. You can have the narcissistic leader who's operating out of narcissistic impulses, but the true believers are following them, not understanding that this is what that's about. You can have the banal evildoers who are following through and enabling a system whereby a narcissist is creating havoc in the lives of people, but it's dressed up as something that's good. History teaches us that a lot of political leaders, a lot of religious leaders, you see a lot of narcissism in, because if you think about ideology, what the most wonderful con that you can make from a narcissistic point of view is to get people to believe that you are a child of God and have been selected by God, by the divine universe, that you are incarnating a divine mission, that you're that important, and you can get people to sacrifice their lives for you. Cult leaders do this all the time. Narcissism, and then that's the more sensational form. But sometimes it's just very, very common regarding and very basic, deeply, profoundly selfish people who misuse others for their own end and don't have a moral compass to prevent them from doing that. That's what narcissistic evil is. So we will be moving on in our next session to think, well, what do we do about that? How can we combat that? And what can other people do? People we know, how do we influence them? Is there a cure? No, there's no cure for evil in the world. We can combat it, but there's always going to be evil. And the best we can do is have a deeper understanding so that we can make some changes in our own little corner of the world to some way combat it. Okay, that's enough for today. Talk to you soon and see you in the next session. Bye.